Alright. So, sound helpers. This stuff exists online. This plays into a lot of what prevents some of these victims that have these outfitted speakers. This is what roadblock gets in the way in a little bit, is because essentially these are representational of groups. So essentially what you'll have is, first you'll have fear, which is basically a group of Mormons that have been so subversively, like, psychotic at those women. It's just a lot of women, okay? It's just mostly it's women and children and shit. That essentially what becomes like a memory trigger of what they're able to get away with, that builds a fear. That fear then stands in the way as a paranoia of them doing their sound torture method, okay? And that this is what then, that fear becomes a cognitive block that prevents the red integration in ways. It's also stuff that they won't talk about that gets in the way of the red integration. It becomes a secret. A lot of times what I found in my research is that once you can free people from their secret, then the process of reintegration starts to happen. And a lot of times it's a lot of those women, while in the hookup site or S&M with those speakers, were subjected to these fucking people, and that their specialized version of sound torture is what they're afraid of. And that's fear. It's an extremely psychotic, militarized type of methodology. It really is. And that it induces a lot of fear, that basically that fear then builds back into a splitting of their psyche in ways. Then you have cops, basically, cops and S&M masters and shit, misogynists, that essentially were able to, with impunity and inoculation, were basically able to rape those women as a form of rape control, that then they usually have like a reminder aspect, that then a very minimal kind of reminder reminds them of how they were able to get away with just blatantly raping them whenever they would violate some sort of mastering kind of rule sets. That right there, the intimidation factor, is what has them where these people are essentially what they refer to as cuckolding masters in a satanic S&M hookup site, and that they run a rape control, and that intimidation essentially is a different type of fear, that whenever they start to exhibit a reintegration, usually these people would come and rape the fuck out of them into splitting the psyche again. And so that gets in the way of their progression of reintegration, based on pretty much probably being on that path, exhibiting normality again after abuse, and then these rape controllers and these S&Ms, these satanic S&Ms, raping them into schizos again, basically. So that is where some might be actually getting reintegrated in ways, but will be fearful of these masters noticing that stuff. Okay? And so that is somewhat of like where they might start to exhibit faking certain stuff so that it prevents. See, essentially, they're like required to stay in a schizo state of mind A lot of times it's based on extortion. A lot of times it's based on extortion, but basically they build such an inoculation that it ends up that they're afraid of and intimidated by the potential for just being raped, punished again, which is kind of what a satanic S&M's punishment is. And see, when they schizo out to leave the satanic S&M, which is what they would have been convinced of, they're basically, the moment that they're not schizo is when they essentially place them back in the S&M with masters that then punish them for not doing what they want again in their S&M. And so then they end up to be leaving, they end up having to just basically subject themselves to constant rape that causes the schizophrenia issue. So that stands in the way of a reintegration for a lot of those people on darkweb with those outfitted speakers. Then you have these people. These are like the 90s semantic pedophile kind of people that are like raging sadists and shit. That essentially they sit essentially with like a specific piece of knowledge that ends up being a love-based blackmail. Essentially, it's like these women will have somebody that they love dearly with all their heart and shit. And that then this stuff is usually like just some regular kind of hookup site blackmail. These groups, they built an intimidation and fear built out of a piece of knowledge that they have specifically about the woman that pertains to the person that she loves the most. Could be child, could be husband, could be ex-boyfriend, could be parents or something like that. I mean, that's, and so that piece of knowledge is like what builds a fearful intimidation of those groups. Essentially, these groups also double as like the online helper teams. And that basically what they are is a group of people that are running silence control over the person while doubling as a person that helps or something. See, these are top level sociopaths. See, in an older world where military guys would just kill everybody, in an older, more effective world where the military guys would just kill all of these people, this type of stuff probably would have never really been noticed in the past, because in the past the military guys would just kill people who did this shit. And so since the onslaught of essentially them not being able to do that without being detected, now what you're getting is the rise of this stuff becoming more prevalent. And so these little groups that act like they're speaker torture helpers or something, they come in basically Mormons, cops, and essentially semantic 90s guys from the 1990s classes. And that those are the people that are maintaining somewhat of a, they call it ghost, a ghost mastering control over their slave. And that is where, when I started doing my sleep education project again, which I've been doing for a couple of weeks now, these are the people that force in a sat radio broadcast, and the V's are the. See, they have a little different. I have a little different approach to these people. It's like I'm not gonna stop doing my super genius fucking idea just because of these stupid little fucking pedophiles. I won't. I'm psychologically made from childhood not to give in to psychopaths. And I will never, ever. I will not give in to these people. Ever. Yeah, well, around here they wanted to rip off my stuff, my ideas and shit, okay? And that fuck those fucking people. It's mine. I ain't ever giving up that. And so then since essentially, there's when they access the dark web profile that ends up pushing their sat radio broadcast into the sound speakers. That is where they also discuss certain stuff while inside of my profile that they use for that, and then I'm able to hear what their discussions are, and then I start researching them. I do. I start researching them, and that's essentially where a lot of what people lack an understanding of is I'll be able to figure out for being a genius, and that just remember that these people are all used to people giving in and giving up to them. So, one of the things about being a wizard from SRA abuse as childhood, is that one of the things that progressed me after the progression of that, then I started to build fear in those stupid pedophiles. And then the presence of me being around started to build an intimidation of a little boy being around what they were doing. And then I would have specific knowledge that would build a fear and intimidation of me being around the little SRA abuse type of stuff as a child. And so essentially I know exactly, in ways what causes them. They'll sit there being seemingly normal, okay? But see, defiance to them, defiance to their most prettily perfect method. See, they're so effective at doing this silencing type of shit that builds like a sociopathic confidence in them. And see, I know that constantly digging at them, constantly about how their 100% method of silencing people doesn't work on me, then it causes them to kind of not be able to control their own internal abusive psyche issue. Because they'll also exhibit this type of schizophrenia stuff when their tried and true method that's worked every single time, everywhere, when it stops working at somebody, that is where they're used to just snapping. And then a lot of these modern groups are always doubling as helper me too, helper me kind of groups and stuff like that. And that's where really what they're doing is like a service contract for victim isolation methods and stuff. And that basically I know in ways that all of what their secrets are. And so they're used to doing a Silk Road silencing method. Is essentially was a method utilized on Silk Road and in S&Ms and stuff. And that the Silk Road had people that had outfitted speakers also. And that essentially I know that the counter-op theoretically surrounds the reality that once they make a silencing, give in and give up control method, that just not giving in, not giving up, not being controlled by them causes them to switch and to snap. And that then, since they're projecting themselves as helpers, sometimes they can't help that stuff in front of people. And then they snap psychologically. And then, if I figure out more and more of their stuff that they pretty much are able to keep a hush hush on, some special specifics and stuff, that's where I research all of that, like, stuff that they like don't allow anybody to ever have on the internet, and then I just put it on the fucking internet right in front of their fucking face, and then it causes them to fucking snap and shit. And that is where, when they do that in front of people that thought that they were like being Me Too helpers or something like that, okay, and that is where essentially that is what it's like an online clearnet method that I've attempted to develop. As like, well, they do that stuff at military guys also, so it's kind of developed for those dudes to figure out ways to like be snapping their psyches and shit for being like that and shit, okay? Because they do a forced Me Too help on the military guys, okay? You know, a lot of them are outfitted with like these cybersecurity speakers from their time in the service and shit. And so then they get people forcing their little fucking radio broadcasts and shit in it. And then they just go around. Nobody actually listens to what they fucking say. And one of the indicative aspects to these people is that part of their psychotic mastering is to force upon people, like forcing a bypass, forcing a sound, forcing some sort of expectation of a video or something, forcing the person to have to adhere to their psycho masters. And so, I just want to get people to understand, part of why I was learning to do typecasting is because then it's like, then people can get it. Like an acting understanding of like what they'll be sitting there. Like behind the scenes, the stuff that I'll be saying will be like fucking with their brain, okay? It'll fuck with their brain. And so the whole idea is that they're psychopaths. The ones that go around doing that Me Too help shit, okay? They are the ones that go around helping SRA victims. The ones that go around helping those women that got schizoed out of an S&M and shit. Those people that do that on darkweb in these groups that are compiled like this. That is where I know exactly what they're actually doing. And I know it's ruining. And I know basically like what their real internal psychology is. One of the things that I was able to develop as a skill is to understand what goes on inside of their psyche. Lots of people put on a fake neurotic normal face. Lots of people do. And so most of those people have like years and years of training of calm, cool, and collectiveness and stuff. And that I know that deep down when people don't see what they're doing, then they're all like raging psychos and shit. And that people that are like that basically these people have like a set of rules that they expect people to fucking adhere to. And that I don't see if I was extorted in S&M, then they would probably just pop up extortion at me, okay? And that I pretty much know that if you just avoid getting extorted, then it kind of nullifies their abilities when they're sitting there having people, outsiders, seeing what they're doing. And that they'll just hate it. They'll just be so used to other people potentially doing this type of stuff. They're the ones that have like buttons that raise volumes and speakers and shit, and they'll just be sitting there seeing like, it's define our fuck like this stuff about how to find the fucking psycho cops that are hijacking YouTube. That shit, that is like against all of those people's rules in their S&M, and that they're so used to like opening up speakers and just torturing the fuck out of somebody until they take something down and shit. And so that's where one of the things about doing my sleep education again is that I wouldn't do it if those people had the ability of turning up the speaker, because it doesn't operate on like a loudspeaker. My sleep education project operates on like a very low volume, meant to, it's like, well, these military guys, they use what S&Ms do with that volume level is they do brainwashes, okay, but it also can be like lectures and stuff like that. And so that is where those people are basically inhibited from making the volume loud. And so that's where I know that as they sit there running their procedural psyop on this Me Too help or sound speaker help shit or whatever the fuck it is, okay? S&M clubber help, victim help, or whatever. It'll revolve around some basic ideas like that. And that's where I know that none of them are helping. And I know that they're just fucking psychopaths and shit. And then I know I like to fish out all their secret little like reasons that they would be psycho-y about. And then here's the real reality. The longest internally with some of these videos, basically, internally it's caused like a memory that has them so used, whenever anybody posts like a video or something, then they're so used to just getting into their S&M and clicking on the face and finding the person's profile and turning up. The hackers do that sometimes. Then they turn up the fucking speaker, then they torture and blackmail the person, and they act like a fucking raging psycho at them and shit. And that the whole idea is that when they have to sit there being calm, cool, and collected, essentially their real personality is the psychopath. And that the longer that they sit there, like training to be calm, cool, and collected, the more likely that they're going to have a sociopathic personalities protector switch that will need to express itself based on them calm, cool, and collectively like keeping themselves in check for so long, and that eventually they won't be able to handle it. And that is really where, you know, it's their own fault. I'm not gonna, you know, this is my research. This is part of my tons of my different types of research. And then I'm not gonna stop. I didn't go and research this stuff just to get the knowledge to be silent about it. Alright? I'm not gonna give in to your guys' stupid ass ideas. And that this is pretty much what it is. They follow me around to social medias, and then they attempt to find stupid ass ideas on why they should be able to erase my stuff and shit. And that all it is mostly a documentation of my research, and that's basically where they don't want all of their satanic S&M club stuff to be known about. And that's why I call them whiny, stupid little pedophiles. That's just basically what they are. And that no amount of stupid masquerade mask fucking pedobang shit is ever gonna make me afraid of stupid little fucking pedophiles. You don't go around doing the woman's research stuff just to be silent about that shit. There's a bunch of feminist chicks that wanted to know about this stuff from somebody that was smart. And I wasn't gonna be keeping it behind any fucking veils and shit. I don't do Satanism. I'm not in S&M, and I don't give a fuck what your guys' internal rules. You people have internal rules. The dark web has internal rules. I don't have to abide by those because I'm not blackmailed into your guys' pedo club. That's basically it. So, the whole idea is that, yeah, a lot of those other people that find that stuff out usually have a pretty bad blackmail, and I don't. And that those people that have that blackmail, they essentially have to adhere to those rules because that stuff starts popping up on their screen. Alright? And then there's the secondary hacker, speaker aspects to that stuff. Also, and so this is where the reason that I was somewhat tasked on this is because I wasn't a part of that, and I'm not a part of that, and that is where I was uniquely in a position to be helping a bunch of people who needed to understand this stuff. And then, since essentially I had an intellect that was enough for people to be okay with having my opinions about stuff, what they never imagined is my vast ability of being a genius. They just knew that I took a bunch of calculus and passed that stuff, and that is where my unique position was, being somebody that was smart enough to be smart and also had a unique profile in a system that essentially wouldn't have the loud sound torture, and then didn't have any extortion abilities to it. And that when those people finally explained why they wanted me to do that stuff, that was essentially their explanation. In that sense, nobody else seemed to fit into that category. I noticed thousands of people suffering on the brink of suicide. And then, essentially, I was the only one in a position. And so, essentially, I agreed to do this research because, essentially, I was the only one who would be able to do it without being tortured in a loudspeaker or something into suicide. And so then I had to sit there and it's like, then I'm like a person that actually cares about human beings. And then I had to like make a decision, figuring out this shit and helping people not get tortured into suicide, or to basically take away the only ability for people to actually understand what any of that shit is. Alright? And so, yeah, I didn't necessarily really want to do that, but sometimes people are in a time and a place that gives them the ability of helping people. And so that's essentially where, yeah, they tugged at every heartstring that I would ever have. They showed me that they had these little, like, enchantment children and shit that were SRA abused in the same way as me as a child, and that is where they were getting that sound torture shit. And it's like, that is like where I have a certain set of some serious Achilles heels, okay? You torture little enchantment children, and that alone was enough for me to like not be able to say no to this type of research that I did. And so this is essentially where, no, I'm not very happy about the last fucking 8 fucking years of my life at all. It was not easy to do this. It required some serious heartache. It required some serious fucking forms of fucking horrible tortures and shit. But I rely on certain beliefs that something will always get better. You know, I'm not talking about the gay stuff. I'm talking about the fact that at some points when I was homeless doing this research, I was very close and on the brink of being tortured into suicide, and that I held on to the only things that could ever like make me through that. And a lot of that has to do with religious faith. Guys, this idea about rock bottoms and shit. Okay, so there was that point that, you know, I had hit psychotic, people were psychotically torturing me and shit in speakers. And I just kept soldiering on. And that is essentially what I was able to do. And that from that, I realized that, yeah, anybody to attain the data that I needed, probably nobody else would have been able to do that. Even those military soldiers that I thought probably they were gonna be doing that, but they couldn't get past the button that makes the volume loud, and they would have ended up blowing their head off from that. And so, the people that I'm talking about are people that I saw in darkweb who had horrible sociopaths that had outfitted them with a pair of fucking cochlear implant speakers and were sitting there torturing them into suicide. And that nobody seemed to be able to do anything about it. So at the very least, I attempted to get as much information and research that I could ever attain about that shit, so that maybe somebody could get some sort of comprehension to what was happening to people that are essentially victims of the most horrible satanic ritual abuse ever. People that represent basically people who went through the same types of things that I went through as a child. What I do is anti-sociopath. You see what I just described there? That is what an anti-sociopath is.